I'm Laura Ingraham. This is the Ingraham Angle from Washington tonight. Thanks for being with us. Winning solves everything. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, let's try one more time to explain stuff to people who I know are frustrated and they're confused about GOP politics right now. Many Republicans, especially donor types, are flummoxed by recent political polls. Now, for sure, the in-crowd thought that Trump was finished. January 6th, another impeachment, multiple investigations, a possible indictment, and he's still relitigating 2020. But guess what? Trump still has almost a 30-point lead in the RCP average over Ron DeSantis, and he leads Biden in the head-to-head as well. But of course, this doesn't speak to the battleground states. That didn't fall Trump's way last go-round, as you remember. In two of those states, according to a new public opinion strategies poll obtained by McClatchy, DeSantis, not Trump, narrowly leads Biden. Of course, DeSantis hasn't jumped into the race yet. He's hinted that he's going to announce after his state legislature wraps its session in May. Now, this has worried some about this late timing of DeSantis's, which they claim may leave him ill-prepared to defend against the former president's bludgeoning attacks and lagging in the type of on-the-ground organizing critical in states with an early nominating contest. Well, for his part, Trump continues what to many seem like petty attacks on DeSantis, and the latest polls about his so-called pudding fingers. And for DeSantis, the attack on Trump wasn't really petty. It was just, kind of off. Now, what a gift it would be for Biden if the election ended up being a referendum about guns and abortion instead of Biden's biggest vulnerability, which we all know is the economy. A CBS YouGov poll released on Sunday showed that 97% view the economy as an important issue, with inflation at 95%, healthcare at 94%. Abortion was down at 79%. So DeSantis is battling Disney. Trump is battling Alvin Bragg. Crowds are showing up with some uncomfortable moments for both men. A crowd in Texas didn't seem to react well recently when Trump, during a rally, hit DeSantis pretty hard, and DeSantis seemed a little rattled over the weekend when a nutty woman rushed the stage in New Hampshire.
14, 16, 18, yeah, thank you. You got to have a little spice in the speech, right? I mean, you got to have a little fun.
Well, a few well-known Republicans have just announced they were supporting Trump. And Thomas Petterfy, a multi-billionaire GOP donor, has hit the pause button on DeSantis, citing the 6-week abortion ban just announced. Now, meanwhile, we watch day by day as our country is slipping away under Biden's team of fools. We're declining in almost every way, and the White House has no intention of doing anything to turn it around. In fact, decline is their policy. Now, under these circumstances, many are left wondering, how did we get here? Now, what a lot of Republicans have never understood is that the Trump movement is the result of despair among tens of millions of GOP voters. These folks always knew that the left was against them, and they never trusted the media. But ever since about 2004 or so, they've come to believe that the leadership of the GOP is also against them. They see Republicans supporting China, Republicans supporting open borders, and Republicans supporting wasteful, silly wars. They also see that Republicans, with a few exceptions like Trump and DeSantis, never ever actually defeat the left on any real issue. The dreaded Larry Hogan, Republican in name only, of Maryland, was governor there, of course. Is Maryland more conservative as a result of Hogan's tenure? Now, clearly, Governor Hogan would rather have Biden reelected than Trump or anyone who agrees with Trump on any policy. We'd rather have Biden win the presidency.
Successful politics is about addition and multiplication. It's not about subtraction and division. We haven't focused on the things that the average American cares about, and it's what my entire efforts have been about.
But that's what's so confounding for people, that you're not running.
I felt like I was in a lifeboat by myself, and it was the SS Titanic Trump was going by. More and more people are jumping off the boat. We now need a bigger boat.
Okay, that made no sense. Charlie Baker, another so-called Republican, was governor of Massachusetts. Well, did he really move that state to the right?
We need, as a party, to move past President Trump and to move on to an agenda that represents the voices of all those in the party and the people of the country. I've just chosen to make the way I govern and the way we get things done a statement about how I think this should work.
He's so sanctimonious, isn't he? Well, the way I govern. Well, the result of the way he governs. After Baker, Massachusetts voters turned the governorship over to liberal Democrat Maura Healey. And that's what happens when establishment Republicans win. They end up presiding over slow liberal entrenchment. So if their brand of conservatism is so in touch with the people, why didn't John McCain or Mitt Romney win in New England states in 2008 and 2012? They didn't. And if so-called moderate conservatives have what it takes, why don't they thrive in places like California, where there are plenty of wealthy people? And one would think that the supposed brainiacs in the old GOP guard would have straightened out the Pentagon, straightened out the intel community, right? Wrong. Both institutions these days, they're just as woke as academia. After watching all these developments, most Republican voters who are populists, whether or not they identify that way, they've come to conclude that the GOP as a national institution is effectively useless. Now, state GOPs may be effective in places like Alabama or Florida, but the national GOP, it's not going to stop China. It's not going to push the Republicans to enforce the borders. It's not going to reform the Pentagon. It's not going to lower the debt. It just won't. In fact, it was the acceptable wing of the GOP that gave Biden one of his biggest crowning achievements, that boondoggle infrastructure bill.
Mitch, it wasn't easy. It wouldn't have happened without your hand. It just wouldn't have gotten done. And I want to thank you for that.
Now, its passage is what made possible, on a simple majority vote, the even worse so-called Inflation Reduction Act. So we had trillions of dollars blown, which further drove up inflation and gave Biden wide regulatory authority to move against gas-powered cars, which he did last week.
That EPA is proposing the strongest ever federal pollution technology standards for both cars and trucks. Today's actions will accelerate our ongoing transition to a clean vehicles future.
Voters see this and they think, thanks, Mitch. And once you've concluded that the national GOP doesn't work, well, you may as well support Trump. Well, maybe it's just a protest vote anyway, right? So if the GOP wants to change this dynamic, I'm not saying they should, but if they want to change this dynamic, they need to start winning. They need to start seeing articles in the national media about how Biden got played by McConnell, not the other way around. We need to see progressives complaining that their guys are rolling over for Republicans instead of the other way around. And most of all, we need to see that the GOP has both the will and the ability to defeat the political forces undermining America at home and abroad. Winning fixes everything. Reagan won a bunch of battles in the 1980s, and the Bushes were still running on those victories in the 2000s. If the GOP starts winning again, most of its problems are going to go away. If the folks who run the GOP really want to beat Trump and nominate someone else, they need to show that they can beat the Democrats. And so far, no good. And that's The Angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.